Hello, I'm Linda Ann, and this is my third contribution to CAC Fantasy Art's Art Crawl event. At first I took this picture frame and I turned it into this picture frame, and now I'm going to make something to go inside of the picture frame. I just need a few lines to get me started, so I'm going to start my sketch with this 2H Artist Loft pencil. These are very inexpensive. You can find them in almost any craft store. Previous to recording, I laid my picture frame on top of the paper and outlined the oval so that I would be sure and keep everything in the right shape. Not that I can't go outside of that, that's no problem. I just want that oval there to be sure that my drawing and painting extends out far enough. So I'm going to start with some little lines, and I'll show you some of the materials I use, because if you get your lines incorrect on your watercolor paper, you need to use something like a kneaded eraser. This is it right here. You can pull it and shape it, and it doesn't destroy the integrity of the paper as much as like a pencil eraser would. It's possible you can't see the lines that I'm sketching very well, because not only am I sketching with a hard-leaded pencil, but I'm trying to use a light touch. I don't always do well at using a light touch, so sometimes I'll pick up my kneaded eraser and just put it down on the paper and lift it up to kind of lighten up that pencil line. I'm also trying to make this line light enough so that if I want to change it once I start painting, I can do that. I'm just kind of putting in some ideas, and there's my little sketch. It is the outline of a fairy's house. I'm trying the frame over it to be sure that everything fits. My watercolors of choice are Twinkling H2Os from ColourArte, and I keep them on a revolving tray so they're easy to get to. I also keep little labels about what color is what, because they don't always turn out the same color as you see in the container. I've wet my paper now, and I'm just going to start laying in some bluish areas around the top. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I want it a little imperfect. And I go down to the horizon line about a third of the way down. And I'm going to add some other colors. Of course, I have to clean my brush on another piece of paper, because if you've followed me at all, you know that I love to have something to start on and to play with. So those other papers, I always save all the paint. Now I'm putting in the grassy areas, greenish areas around the house. Started with a nice, very yellowish green color. And notice that I'm going outside that oval, which is no problem because the frame will cover up anything that is kind of ragged or not refined. I considered making art for this frame all in black and white with maybe just a touch of color here and there, and I may have to do that later, but tonight I want to play with color, and I love color. So I'm putting in a little more, another layer. I use brushes that are very soft, and I don't use them in any other paints except my watercolors. I'll use the same brush from one brand of watercolor to another, but I don't use acrylic brushes in my watercolors, and I don't want acrylic to get in my watercolor brushes, because it breaks down the integrity of the brush. The brush should, if it's a good brush, it should return to the shape and give me a good point. The rounds that I like to work with will give you a good point when they're wet, and will return to shape easily. They'll have a little bit of spring to the bristles of the brush, but I like fairly soft bristles. I want to get a little sunshine into my painting, and it's very possible that I'm going wrong by putting in this yellow color, because my frame has no yellow in it at all, but it might enhance things. So I'm putting in the lighter yellows on the left-hand side of the building, and the darker yellows on areas that would be to the right. The brushes that I've been using most lately are quite inexpensive, and the brand name is Royal and Langnickel. And I believe I find these at Michael's. If it's not Michael's, it's Hobby Lobby, but I'm almost certain that I buy these at Michael's. I started with a very light yellowish color on the left-hand side and added a little red to that on the house, added a little red to that color to give the illusion of shadows on the little fairy house. And now I'm adding some green around because I kind of doubt if she mows her lawn. I think it probably looks very natural. So some little grass up around the house all the way around will look good. I wanted to bring down the color from the sky, so I'm bringing that onto the walkway and into some of the shadowed areas of the doors. Putting a little into the grass, reshaping the sky just slightly. I continue to pull my frame over to see how it's going to look, and it looks like an awful lot of yellow for this frame, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will end up that way. But if I don't like it in this frame, I'll just make something else. I'll have fun doing this one. See all those yellow colors? And notice that I left some white spots. That gives you a lot more sparkle in your watercolors when you leave a little white. If you've followed my channel and watched my watercolors at all, you know that one of the things I love to do is use a paper where I have cleaned up from a previous painting. And that's what I'm doing now. This is the same pad that I pulled the paper from and taped down to my board. I'm wetting it down with water, and I will dip my brush into the paint that's left over here on the side and paint it onto the paper. Sometimes I'm careful about what I paint. Other times I don't care. I just slap it on. And because I'm wetting this paper without it being taped down, that means that I'm going to have to, when it gets dry, I'm going to have to put something on it to keep it from being curled, because it will curl up in the notebook here. So I just continue to play and pull that color from the side of the board here and place it on the paper. And while I'm doing this, I'm letting the other one that I'm actually working on right now, I'm letting that dry because I want to add another layer. I think I want to get rid of some of the yellow that I put into it. I think it'll be good to have some of it, but I think I want to get rid of some of it. So I'll look at it once the other one is dry and see where I'm going with that. In the meantime, this gives me something else to do, and it starts me for my next paintings. If you have fear of the blank canvas, the blank page, the blank paper, this is a really good way to get over it. This has dried thoroughly now, and I'm trying the frame over it, and I see that the yellow is just way overwhelming. It doesn't go with the rest of the frame, and so I'll have to deal with this a bit, but it still may work. We'll see. And like I always say, if it doesn't work, that just gives me an excuse to do another one. Not that I need an excuse. This is my full-time job now, being an artist. So I'm going to start with this Sharpie and define the lines a bit. I don't usually use a Sharpie, but I'm afraid I can't find all of my art pens. I have no idea where those things have traveled to. So I'm using a Sharpie and putting in some of these black lines, and I'll be adding some textures and just defining the areas with these marker marks, dark marks. That's going to get rid of some of the yellow, but I don't think it's going to get rid of enough. So I'll probably be going back with some more color later. I'm deliberately making this a wonky little house. I want it to look very whimsical because I am calling it a fairy house. So lopsided works, and not quite fitting properly will work, and weird little windows in places that you might not think of windows at other times works. I'm really glad up there where I put that little dot, I'm really glad that I have that white area. I'm going to go back and do the flag. That was intentional. I had drawn a flag on top of the building, so I'm going back and defining the flag. And this is going to work out really great. Really like the way this is coming out. So adding a little texture to the roof line. The only real art pen I could find was this one with the brush tip. And while it's a nice permanent line, I'm not quite sure how the Sharpies are going to react with my watercolor when I go over it again, but this is a nice little line, but it's way too broad. I wanted some fine-tipped lines, but I'm working with what I have. So I see that this is taking care of a lot of the yellow problem. I'll be trying the frame again. Lots of fun to play with textures and have no real emphasis on perspective and getting the perspective right in buildings. That's the I love architecture, but I'm not always having fun when I draw architecture, when I draw buildings, because I want the buildings to be perfect, and that's what makes this enjoyable. It's not perfect. And I'm going to put the doorknob over here on this side on this particular door, and when I get to the other door I'm going to put it on the other side, because we don't know if that fairy's right-handed or left-handed. You know, I spent over 40 years in education, and a lot of it in elementary education, and fun little things like this with bright, bright colors are excellent story starters for kids. Just show it to them and, you know, say, who lives here, and tell me about it. Also, when you're talking about a child's art to the child, one of the things that I learned early on, which I have valued this information, is not to ask the child, what is it? When they make something, they know what it is. Instead, a better question is, and it's not exactly a question, but a better response is, tell me about that. And when they begin to tell you, you begin to understand what it is, even if you can't tell from the drawing. You can imagine how we might feel if we worked diligently on our art and then displayed it and someone came up and said, what is it? So that's just a child-friendly response to say, tell me about it. If I had a group of children here with me today and I gave them the prompt of draw a fairy house, I guarantee you it would be much more creative than what is coming out of my watercolors and pen. During my years in public education, I didn't always teach in the art room. I taught for many years in the art room, and I substituted in the some of the same art rooms where I had set up the programs later after I retired from Oklahoma school system. But I always used art as a vehicle to teach other subjects. I taught social studies, science, math. Math was a big one. They could understand when I illustrated something or when they illustrated something. And I still have students coming back saying, do you remember how you taught us to round numbers with that little car that went over the hill? And, you know, it just worked. So back to my art here. I'm trying the frame again. It is still too orangey yellow. Doesn't go with my pink flowers. So I'm going to work on it a bit more. Going to add some more twinkling H2Os. And I also think that this will bring out the center of interest, which is my door, that little wonky front door there. I want to make it very bright. And I think that's helped a lot right there. That ties in better, at least it will when it dries and gets a little lighter. Ties in just a little better with the background of the picture frame. Another possibility here to help it tie in better with the picture frame is to take some of those paper clay flowers that I already have prepared and glue them right onto the picture. And while that's a pretty good solution for this, I kind of like the picture like it is. I like the frame like it is, so I may just let these two part. One thing I'd like to let you know about is that I had to be careful with the watercolor not touching too much of the black line because it was moving and causing it to bleed out a bit into the watercolor. So I had to be pretty careful about going around those lines. Now, what caused that? I'm not sure. It could be because I put watercolor first and then the lines. It could be because I used a Sharpie and a Pigma pen and perhaps didn't let it dry long enough before I went back. But nevertheless, you need to know that that's a possibility. So here's the way it turned out. But should I decide to use it inside this frame, I want to show you what I would do to it. I would add the flowers at the bottom. See where I place those? And then I'd add just a few violet hints here and there up in the castle or the little fairy's house. I'd like to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Studio ABC. The C is spelled S-E-E, like see with your eyes. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Make a comment. I try to answer every comment that YouTube allows me to answer. Sometimes it doesn't go through. Share and subscribe to my channel, please, if you haven't already done that. Thank you so much for watching.